Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira here. Today is January the 24th. We're starting one more live stream here with the expat and foreign citizen community interested in Brazil. As usual, if you are a participant in this live stream, you have a priority in terms of picking the subjects we're going to be discussing. And if I don't see any topics of interest showing up here in our chat, I'm going to discuss some of the most recent consultations we had with our clients. So today we had an interesting consultation with a gentleman who was planning to have a child in Brazil. And this is kind of recurring, so what I'm going to be sharing here is not specific to a client, but more specific to a type of recurring interest of foreign citizens in Brazil. So, as you probably know, one of the ways of acquiring residency in Brazil and potentially the citizenship is to have a child in Brazil. That means if you are pregnant and you happen to give birth in Brazil, both the mother and the father could secure the residency. The process is kind of straightforward. Of course, there is a need for endless paperwork, right? Like red tape and bureaucracy are hallmarks of the Brazilian culture, the Brazilian society, and this is not going to be an exception. However, from a right perspective, this is pretty straightforward. You have a Brazilian child, you are entitled to a residency, and actually not only the residency, but potentially you could apply for citizenship in just a single year of continuous residency in Brazil. There is a specific requirement which may be challenging to many people. So maybe, although you can potentially apply in a year, you may need more time to apply for the citizenship because one of the requirements is going to be a conversational level of Brazilian Portuguese. Okay, and that's not the same thing as Spanish, right? As you probably know, there is a high level of overlapping between Spanish and Portuguese languages, but believe me, they are not the same. Okay, so if you come to Brazil and if you try to speak in Spanish, you're gonna see eventually you're gonna get the idea across, but most people would have a pretty hard time understanding what you're trying to convey, and vice versa. For some reason, maybe because of lack of a better understanding, most people abroad, they are going to believe Brazilians are fluent in Spanish. Particularly in the United States, the Brazilian community, particularly those who are living in the US, they are going to end up, meeting Spanish speakers, and they are going to increase their understanding of the Spanish language, and they are going to be able to speak a somewhat understandable type of what we call Portunhol, right, which would be a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. Like, we know some words in Spanish, other words like we think we know, but we don't know. But at the end of the day, we can get a point across. And because of that, like US citizens, they are going to assume that every single Brazilian is going to be able to communicate in Spanish, which is not the case. But going back to the point at hand, for you to secure citizenship in Brazil, you're going to need to speak a reasonable conversational level of Brazilian Portuguese. And therefore, if you have a child in Brazil, although you would potentially qualify for Brazilian citizenship a single year down the road, that would require the Portuguese, the spoken Portuguese, right? So if you don't have a knowledge of Portuguese, more probable than not, you're not going to apply a single year down the road, but probably a few years down the road when you are able to communicate properly in Portuguese. Okay, so very recurring theme. People coming to Brazil to have a child as a way of securing residency and citizenship in Brazil. Very interesting. Like there are potentially two different groups of people coming to Brazil to have a child. More often, it's going to be someone coming from a war-torn country, such as, of course, Ukraine, right? Countries in the Middle East, like we had a consultation recently with a family from Palestine. We have, families from Lebanon and other Middle East countries. But we are starting to see an uptick in families coming from the US, okay, from Europe, so-called developed countries. For the US, the two main reasons why people would like to have a child in Brazil are going to be the concern about wars, endless wars, right? There was a client a while ago, like he had, several children and they were all boys. So he was saying, listen, in the US, we have this tradition of fighting wars abroad, and I don't want to risk having one of my sons, one of my boys killed. And therefore, we want to explore Brazil as a plan B. Okay, that was one of the explanations. Another explanation is like the tax reach of Uncle Sam. As you probably know, the U.S., they tax on a global basis, and their reach is like unlimited, right? And you know about that because whenever you are in any country of the world, when you're going to open a bank account, you're probably going to hear this question, like, are you a U.S. person, right? And this question is intended to enable that particular institution to provide information to the U.S. government that you have a bank account in that particular country. And that happens across the board, right? Like it doesn't matter if it is Singapore, if it is Brazil, Argentina, any country in the world, you're most probably going to hear this type of question whenever you are handling some type of financial transaction. So the idea here is that, like you don't want your child to go through this type of outreach. And then if you have a child in Brazil, potentially, as long as you don't pursue the U.S. citizenship, your child would not be subjected to this type of, extreme reach by Uncle Sam. Okay, that's the explanation from our clients. It's not a theory or a thesis or my thoughts. That's actually the explanation from some U.S. parents who want to have Brazil as a place for their child to come to life. Now, you may say, well, Brazil also has the global taxation. Yes, that's true. But Brazil also allows you to file the so-called tax exit, meaning that if you're going to leave abroad for good, you basically file a specific form with the Brazilian government. And the Brazilian government, at least up to now, they are going to leave you alone, okay? So you file the tax exit. Of course, if you have assets in Brazil, you still need to declare these assets and eventually pay for taxable events in Brazil. But Brazil is not going to be chasing you for your income, for instance, in the US, in the UK, in the Arab Emirates, in the world, as long as you file the tax exit declaration, because then you are giving notice, to the Brazilian government that you are leaving the country. And, surprisingly, they will tend to leave you alone, okay? That's not the case for the US. In the US, you don't file, like you are never alone, right? It doesn't matter if you go to Mars, if you're making money over there, Uncle Sam is going to want your taxes, right? So Brazil, from that perspective, it seems to be a better route for a child to come to life from this U.S. parents' perspective. Okay, we got some participants here. Nina S. For the digital nomad visa, does the passport have to be valid until 6 months after the validity of the visa, or just until the end of the trip? So the 6 month is kind of customary requirement, and it's a kind of international requirement. Okay, so like if you're gonna travel to the U.S., they are gonna expect you to have at least 6 months remaining in your passport, and that's gonna be the same thing for Brazil, Nina. Okay, so if you are planning to apply for the digital nomad visa, actually it's not going to be just 6 months. It's actually going to be 1 year, because that's for how long the digital nomad visa is going to be valid. So if you show up with 6 months, right, they are not going to give you a year, because clearly this is not going to be supported by the passport that you have at hand. On an exception basis, an officer, like a consular officer, they could very well give you a nomad visa on a 6 month passport. But I would assume most officers, they would refuse, because again, how can you give a 1 year type of visa if you just have 6 months on your passport, right? Team Edwards, welcome team. Hi, I'm considering buying a property in Brazil. I have a CPF which I got in 2018, but I haven't used it yet. Would this be okay? Thanks. Yes, team. First thing, thank you for showing up again. You are you know, a participant who's always here, like supporting our lives. Welcome, team. And the answer is yes. You're gonna be absolutely fine. And the CPFs, in theory, they do not expire. So even if your CPF was issued, let's say in 1998, right? 1998, it's like what, 30, a long time ago, like about 30 years ago, this CPF would still be good. However, if you have a CPF and there is no taxable events, and you're not filing tax returns, and you're not doing anything at all with the CPF, after some time, the Brazilian Revenue Service is going to have the CPF under a kind of a dormant status or inactive status, right? But that doesn't mean that your CPF was canceled or it was suspended. It just means it is in this kind of inactive status. And if you just request the help from an accountant in Brazil, they could very easily make the CPF active again. But you don't need to reissue. You're going to be using the same number of the CPF that you got back in 2018 or 1998. Okay, team? All right. So going back to the strategy of having children in Brazil, another question that we hear is like, can I go to have a child in Brazil? Is this legal, right? So the answer is like there is no specific visa for people to have a baby in Brazil. And whenever you are entering the country, you're going to be going through customs. And one of the questions you're going to be asked is like, what are you coming to do in Brazil? If you are visiting the country under a tourist visa or a visa waiver, you are supposed to come to Brazil for tourism, right? Like you're not supposed to come to Brazil to have a child. So if you have a tourist visa and you arrive at customs and you say, listen, I'm coming here to have a child, right? To give birth to a child, there is going to be a discrepancy between the purpose of your visit to Brazil and the visa that you have. And this is one of the traditional reasons for an immigration officer to deny entry, right? Incompatibility between the visa and the purpose of the visit, right? So what should you do? Well, I'm not going to tell you over here to lie, okay? But I can tell you what people usually do. They are going to say, listen, I'm here to enjoy Brazil, okay? That's what people usually do. And of course, like if you have, like if the expecting mother is showing like a really big belly, there is a chance that the immigration officer is gonna see, and he's gonna, or he or she is gonna understand that the purpose of the visit is not really, to travel around Brazil, because usually people are not gonna be traveling, a few weeks before giving birth for, leisure, and he could deny entry, right? So usually people we know who are coming to Brazil to give birth, like they are gonna plan to enter Brazil, like not so late in the pregnancy. They are gonna come, around a 4 or 5 month mark of pregnancy, because then, like the immigration officer is probably not going to be able to tell that this person is coming just for the purpose of giving birth in Brazil. Again, I'm not advising anyone to lie. I'm just sharing our experience with this type of, clients or people securing permanent residency and potentially citizenship in Brazil through a Brazilian child. Okay? All right, Nina S. Thank you for the explanation, but is it enough if the passport is valid until the end of visa, or does he have it to be an extra 6 months after the visa is already finished? Nina, there is some wiggle room for interpretation here, okay? Like those rules, they are not written anywhere, I guarantee, okay? They're not written anywhere. But in my understanding, as long as you have enough time in your passport for the 1 year, you are absolutely fine, okay? And just to give an example as why these things, they are not like written in stone. We had a client who traveled to Brazil, before the 6 month period, and he stayed in Brazil like for 3 months. So he had 3 months remaining in his passport, and we handled the digital nomad visa application in Brazil. And when he got the approval, he had probably a single month left in his passport, and he was still able to get the visa, right? But this is a different type of situation. I think that in your case, you're talking about getting the visa at a Brazilian consulate or embassy abroad. And this case that I just told you about, it was an application in Rio de Janeiro, right? Like, so he traveled to Rio de Janeiro for, leisure. He actually had like a romantic partner in the city, and he was able to keep working remotely, and he decided to apply for the digital nomad visa. So all of that, it happened during the stay in Rio de Janeiro, and we were able to secure the, and by the way, when you do it in Brazil, it's not actually a visa. We call it a visa, that's what it's called, but it's actually a residency card, right? So at the end of the process, there is no stamping on the passport. It's actually a card, a somewhat green card. The card is greenish, and that's what he got. So there was no actual stamping on his passport, and probably that's another reason why the Brazilian federal police would not mind about giving him the 1 year stay, because I mean it was an independent card, and he could basically just get another passport through the consulate of the United States in Rio de Janeiro, and this new passport would not have an impact on the 1 year visa that he got, because the 1 year visa was issued through a separate card. Okay, so just to show you that there are many different situations that could apply depending on the specifics of the applicant. Team Edwards, many thanks. You're welcome, team. All right. So, as we were discussing about having a child in Brazil, taxation is usually a factor taken into consideration. we do have many consultations with foreign citizens who are deeply concerned about, the taxation effects of staying in Brazil, right? Just as a recap for those who don't know yet, you're going to become a tax resident. I mean, there are about 4 or 5 or maybe 6 different circumstances. I'm going to tell you about the two major ones, the two main ones. The main one is like a time basis trigger. So if you stay 183 days in Brazil and you fly abroad, right? You leave Brazil, on this mark, you're not a tax resident. If you stay a day longer, so if you are 184 days in Brazil, then you are a tax resident, okay? And that's something that happens automatically. You don't need to file. You don't need, of course, to say, I would love to be a tax resident. It's just a matter of staying in the country. It does not matter if you are. It does not matter if you are in Brazil to study, to work, to travel, if you are under a digital nomad visa, if you are under a retirement visa, or even if you are illegally in the country. The idea is you are 184 days in the country, you are a tax resident, okay? That's the first trigger. The second trigger is when you acquire one of the higher level residency authorizations to stay in Brazil. I'm going to give you 2 examples. Like if you marry a Brazilian and you secure the permanent residency, on the same day that you get your RNEMA, right? You went for the interview, they said, all right, here is your protocol, like they're going to give you a printout with your RNEMA, which is like the identification number for foreign citizens. On that day, you became a tax resident, okay? Potentially going back to the day when you entered the country. Okay, so there is no 184 days. Let's say you came on a Monday, on a Friday. Of course, it takes longer, but just for the sake of the example, you came on a Monday, on a Friday, you secured the residency through marriage, right? On Monday, you considered a tax resident. Okay, there is no 184 days. Like you became on day 0, you became a tax resident. So these are the 2 main triggers for you to become a tax resident. And when you become a tax resident, the concern we see from foreign citizens is that you're going to be taxed on your global income, kind of similar to what happens in the United States. So Brazil is going to look at not only whatever you're doing in Brazil, but they're going to look abroad as well. So if you are a U.S. citizen, if you are being paid a salary of X amount of US dollars, Brazil is going to tax you on your U.S. salary, okay? And, the mitigation strategy adopted by Brazil, which is actually similar to what the U.S. does, is that whatever you're paying in taxes in your country of origin, so in our example, in the United States, whatever you're paying in taxes over there is going to be applied in Brazil as a tax credit. Potentially offsetting whatever you have to pay in Brazil, right? So it's not that bad. And some people, they get really annoyed. They say, well, but I'm coming here to Brazil. I don't want to pay taxes. I'm just here, to have a good time. Listen, you are using the country's infrastructure, like the entire, like public, services and everything else, although not perfect and ideal, you are still residing in the country. So I think it does make sense for you to pay some level of taxes once you are in Brazil as a resident, right? And if you don't want to pay taxes, pretty easy, don't stay longer than 183 days. Brazil is not going to bother you with taxes unless you have a taxable event in Brazil, such as buying a property, right? If you buy a property, Brazil is not going to bother you just because you bought a property with global taxation. But of course, you need to pay annual property taxes. If you're doing short-term rental, you need to pay income taxes on the income, right? I think it makes sense. Nina asks, thank you very much. Thank you, Nina, for participating. I hope to see you again here. James Horgan, welcome, James. Almost sure that James is a recurring participant here. If we apply for a digital nomad visa in Brazil, do we need to show up in person at the consulate or federal police with the physical documents only after we got the approval already? Yes. James, like whenever you secure a longer term immigration benefit, you're gonna need to register. You're gonna need to register at the Brazilian Federal Police. Okay, so we're gonna be talking about a couple of different things over here. If you are applying at a consulate, okay, depending on the consulate, some consulates, they are gonna want you to show up in person. Some consulates, they do not want you to show up in person. And this is pretty common, like different consulates from the same country, they are gonna have different procedures. And that makes sense because think about the US, it's a continental size country. So, the consulates in Los Angeles and San Francisco, they are pretty different than the consulate in Texas, right? In addition to distance, you have like cultural traits, you have, so many specifics. So different Brazilian consulates in a country like the US, they are gonna have different procedures. So it may be very well possible, James, that you're gonna get a digital nomad visa through a certain consulate without even showing up. While for other consulates, they are not gonna give you the visa unless you do show up in person. Okay, so that's the answer for the first part of your question. And before you say, all right, so I'm gonna do like a forum shopping. I'm gonna, try to find the easiest consulate around. You cannot do so. Like, one of the ways for the consulate to avoid forum shopping, meaning, to avoid people picking which consulate they want to go, they are going to require a proof of residency from you in order to allow you to apply for the visa. So, in our example, California, there is a consulate in Los Angeles, there is another one in San Francisco. You need to show a driver license from California, right? You cannot show a driver license from Texas and say, well, I have this driver license from Texas, but I'm traveling here in California, and therefore I'm coming here. They're gonna say, well, wrong consulate. You gotta go to Houston, okay? So that was the first part of your question. The second one, attending a registration at the Polícia Federal, okay? So it does not matter where you secure the visa or the residency, you gotta attend a mandatory registration at the Brazilian Federal Police. So in our example, let's say if you got the visa remotely through the Consulate of Brazil in San Francisco, right? You never showed up for an interview, you sent the documents, the passport, they provided the visa, and they sent back everything to you by Federal Express. And then you travel into Brazil because you have the digital nomad visa. You have 30 days. You have 30 days to register with the Brazilian Federal Police. And during the registration, they are going to want to see two things in hard copy and authentic version, okay? It's going to be your passport, and it's going to be your apostilled birth certificate, right? Like, the Brazilian government is crazy about birth certificates. It's part of how we identify a person. So if you show up for this registration and you have like a photocopy of your birth certificate, even though it has the apostille, it has like a sworn translation, guess what? They are not gonna allow your registration. In general, right? Like, there is always some level of exception. Maybe it is a new agent at the federal police, and if they accept a copy, that's possible, but in our experience, I would say probably there is a chance higher than 95% that if you present a photocopy of a birth certificate, they are going to say no. You're not going to be able to register. And then you're going to need to scramble to get your authentic birth certificate if you don't have one handy, because if you exceed 30 days in the country without registering, you're going to risk have your digital nomad visa voided because of lack of registration with the Brazilian Federal Police. Okay, I hope that was helpful, James. Tim Edwards, another question. Excuse my ignorance, please. Tim, any question is a good question. The only ones who need to know things here are us. You guys can ask any questions. Please feel free to ask any questions. What is the RTD registry and who is responsible for filing the birth certificate with it? So the RTD registry, and before we get to the RTD, in Brazil, there is the so-called registry. In Portuguese, we call it cartório. Okay, and we have 7 different types of cartórios in Brazil. Just some of the examples, okay? We have the real estate registry. They are in charge of keeping real estate records. We have the so-called ofício de notas. This registry is in charge, for instance, of real estate closing transactions. They are also in charge of validating power of attorneys. They could, for instance, authenticate signatures and a bunch of other things. There is another major type of registry, which is known as the RCPN, which is the registry in charge of births, of marriages, deaths, adoptions, and this type of, like natural life events. That's another type of registry. And the RTD, it happens to be a special type of cartório or registry in charge of recording documents. The idea behind the RTD is to give you publicity to a specific document. So if your document is from abroad, for instance, if you have let's say, a birth certificate, and you're gonna buy a real estate property in Brazil, you're gonna need to record your birth certificate at the RTD registry in order for this birth certificate to be acceptable. However, just like everything else in Brazil, a ton of red tape and bureaucracy, right? Let's not forget, if there is no red tape and bureaucracy, you're not in Brazil, you're elsewhere. So it's not, the RTD by itself is not enough. When you're gonna buy a property in Brazil, right, your birth certificate first is gonna need an apostille, and the apostille is gonna be obtained abroad. If you are from the US, you need to get the apostille from the state in which you were born. That was step number 1. Step number 2, there is a need for a sworn translation. It's not any type of translation, and it gotta be done in Brazil. It gotta be done through a tradutor juramentado who is registered with the trade board of a specific state. Although this examination and registration for the translator is done on a state-by-state basis, you can use a sworn translator from any Brazilian state. However, remember, sworn translation is not the same thing as a certified translation. If you ask someone in the US if they can do a sworn translation, they may say yes, but they may be misunderstanding that a certified translation would suffice, and that's not the case. So let's go back. Step number 1, apostille. Step number 2, the sworn translation. After the sworn translation, that's when you're gonna take this document to the RTD for recording, okay? And after the recording, then you're gonna take those documents to the ofício de notas, where the closing is gonna take place. In terms of who's responsible for filing, the RTD is open to anyone. Like, you don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to be a realtor. Anyone can go to the RTD registry and ask for your papers to be recorded. to give a publicity, in a sense, to these documents, so they are going to become acceptable for a legal process such as the closing of a real estate. Okay, team, I hope that was helpful. Riven Star, do you know the vaccine requirements for Brazil? Right. So a few decades ago, there would be, and I think there is still a recommendation, like for yellow fever, a bunch of other things, but they are not enforced. Okay, Riven. Let's say if you are from the U.S., you go right now, I don't know in which city you are. Let's assume you are in Dallas. You go to the DFW airport and you buy a ticket for this evening and you fly to Brazil. Nobody's going to ask you about vaccines, okay? Until not long ago, as you may assume, like there was a huge thing about the COVID vaccine. They were super strict, right? Like, I mean, they would have additional people at the airport chasing people for the vaccination cards. And there was a potential reason for turning down people at the borders. But nowadays, there is zero vaccine requirements enforced for Brazil. Okay, Riven. Noel, a friend of mine couldn't withdraw money to Western Union because she owed the state some tax, so they blocked her CPF. Can Brazil just block your CPF if they want to? Uh, that doesn't sound right. No, I mean that doesn't sound right. Like the taxation authority, blocking CPF is because of unpaid taxes. It doesn't sound right. Okay, usually a CPF is going to become inactive if you don't have any type of a taxable event, or if you're not filing tax return. Okay, so maybe your friend assumed that because she would own taxes, her CPF was blocked. Okay, but the most probable than not, it was just a matter. Let's say if you get a CPF, in 2010, right, and now we are in 2024, so 14 years down the road, 20 years down the road, you never use the CPF for anything. You're not filing taxes. The Brazilian authority is going to put your tax number in an inactive status, right? But that doesn't mean that you own taxes. Okay, that it just means that the CPF is not being used, and as a precaution to avoid fraud, they are going to have the CPF as inactive, almost in a way to force people to either use the CPF or leave it like inactive, so nobody else is going to use it for fraudulent purposes. Okay, Noel. I'm from Australia. Glad to know, Riven. We have many clients from Australia. Okay, probably not surprisingly, most of our clients they are from English-speaking countries. So the majority of our clients and friends here at the live streams, they're going to be from the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and so on. Okay, like if you are a Spanish speaker, you're probably going to be better served elsewhere. But glad to know you're from Australia, Riven. Uh, many applicants for permanent residency through marriage from Australia. Okay, very surprisingly, I don't know, Australians probably love the Brazil and Brazilian people as well. We have a large number of marriage-based residency applicants coming from Australia. Very, very interesting. Okay, and then we have some weird time availabilities for consultation because we know that people from Australia are in a very different time zone, and therefore we try to accommodate our friends from Australia by offering some type of very early or very late time availabilities in our calendar. All right, going back to the digital nomad visa, the digital nomad visa it remains as a favorite. It's gonna be the go-to visa for most people trying Brazil as a potential place for long-term residency. And we like to say that the digital nomad visa, it works pretty well as a bridge, right? Like you want to stay in Brazil, you don't know if you want to stay for 6 months, for a year, for 5 years, or 10 years. The digital nomad visa, it makes a lot of sense because it allows you to stay for a year. And during this 1 year, you're going to not only experience the country, but if you like the country, you can potentially decide on a better route for a longer term stay in Brazil. So that's why we call the digital nomad visa in Brazil a bridge visa. All right. James Horgan. All right, James. Are the income regulations for the digital nomad visa strict? My income varies a bit depending on the amount I work. In average, is more than 1,500, but it could also be a little bit less sometimes. So very interesting, James. Like in Brazil, traditionally, when we are filing an application for the digital nomad visa, we're gonna use the last bank statement that the applicant has. If you apply at a Brazilian consulate abroad in the US, it's pretty common for them to ask you for the last three. So let's say if you are applying in the US, if you're applying, in the Brazilian at the Brazilian consulate in New York, I don't know, like in Houston or Atlanta, most probably than not, they are going to ask you for three bank statements. And if one of these bank statements is below 1,500, I would expect a denial. I would expect a denial. Okay. Now, if you apply in Brazil through us, we've been consistently getting applicants approved with a single bank statement, right? We actually do that to save in translation costs for our clients. We just use the last one, okay? And I don't know if it is because we are a law firm or if it is because anyone can apply in Brazil with a single bank statement. But what I can tell you is that we are able to approve applicants with a single bank statement. Now there is a plan B for you, James. Not sure if you know about the 18,000 Plan B route. So for those applicants who are not making 1,500 a month, as an alternative, you could show a balance of 18,000 US dollars in your bank account. Okay, so let's say for a different example, like you're making $500 in a month, $200 in the other month, and $900 in the third month. As long as you have $18,000 in your personal bank account, it could be a checking, it could be a savings, it could be an investment account. That's gonna allow you, James, to meet the financial requirement. Okay. Now, just because we basically see this question every single day, I'm gonna answer even though you're not asking the question. All right. So if I have 18,000, do I still need to show a contract? Yes, you still need to show a contract because from the Brazilian government perspective, digital nomad means you have some type of work activity. It doesn't need to be formal employment. It could be freelancing. It could be a contracting relationship, meaning you are working as a contractor on a contracting basis. and that's fine. But they want to see a contract. They are pretty attached. They are crazy about contracts. So even if you have the 18,000, you're still gonna need to show a contract, right? We like to joke that if there is no requirement for a contract, this could also be known as the 18,000 US dollars visa, not the digital nomad, meaning that anyone with 18,000 in their bank account would qualify for the digital nomad visa, and that's not the intent from the Brazilian government. And therefore, even if you have 18,000, you still need to present a contract, right? Just to make this example extreme, let's think about Elon Musk. Elon Musk already came to Brazil, and we have, by the way, the Starlink internet in Brazil. It works amazingly. We don't have many Teslas because of the currency discrepancy. Teslas are actually very rare in Brazil, but Starlink is a huge success in Brazil. Starlink is really big because of Brazil continental dimensions. So you can imagine, let's say, if you are in the Amazon, right? Like, I mean, cable is not going to reach you there, and radio internet is horrible, at least like the ones we had before Starlink. But Starlink is working amazingly in Brazil. So now, let's say Elon Musk wants to come to Brazil. Elon Musk has, like about 200 billion dollars in assets, right? Let's say an income of $1 billion at least per year. He still needs a contract, right? And he's the owner of the companies. It doesn't matter. He's going to need a contract to come to Brazil as a digital nomad. All right, just to bring some fun here to our life. Okay, all right. Noel, thank you. You're welcome, Noel. Tim Edwards, very helpful. Thanks so much. You're very welcome, Tim. Okay, so digital nomad, many questions about the digital nomad. Not surprisingly, another major visa is the retirement visa. People are, discovering Brazil as a retirement destination. And by the way, these visas, they are fairly recent, like the digital nomad, actually from 2022. The retirement visa, a very young visa in Brazil as well. So I would say people are finding out about Brazil as a potential destination for a retirement. We have a very interesting segment of clients here at the firm. For instance, the U.S. military. Okay, we love the U.S. military clients. Like they reach retirement age. Some are going to reach like in their 50s. We had an exception, a gentleman in his 30s who was retired because, like of personal circumstances, and they like to come to Brazil to enjoy a higher standard of living based on how much they are paid in retirement, right? Like in the U.S., you can make a lot of money, but the cost of living is also very high, I would say. So if you have a fixed retirement amount, this money will potentially further if you are living in Brazil. So, like this type of client, this segment, they usually like to go to the northeast of Brazil, where, cost of living is like substantially less than what you would see in a big city such as Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, right? Like Rio de Janeiro is another major destination for foreign citizens. But Rio de Janeiro, particularly if you are, close to the beach, if you are going, to fancy places, cost of living could be just the same as you would see in a major U.S. city, right? Same thing as in São Paulo. If you are like in the fanciest areas of São Paulo, if you're going to fancy restaurants, you're gonna be probably spending as much you would spend in New York City. Now, if you change the destination, if we are talking about the northeast of Brazil, then it changes the cost dynamics substantially, right? Last week, I was in two Brazilian cities. I was in Brasilia, and I was in Fortaleza, right? And in Fortaleza, I would pay for a meal. I would be paying, for instance, in some places, I would pay, with some type of soda. I would pay 19 Brazilian reais, right? Which is going to be roughly like $4, right? Like for rice, beans, salad, some type of meat. It could be beef, it could be chicken, and a soda, or you could have like a juice, like fresh juice prepared on the spot. I'm not talking about juice like you get in the U.S. that comes in a box that has been on a shelf where you don't know where for several months. No, I'm talking about fresh juice. It costs about the same as soda, okay? And you will get like this whole meal for about $4. So this is in Fortaleza area. It's actually not in Fortaleza itself, but it's pretty easy to find the same level of cost of living in Fortaleza as well. But of course, you're not going to find this type of cost like in Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo. So picking the city is also going to allow you, to find the ideal combination of, cost of living, features, like if you like the beach, if you like a small town type of vibe, or if you want to be in a major cosmopolitan city such as Rio de Janeiro, right? There is something for everyone. Star, cheers, boa sorte. Thank you, Rivan. I hope to see you again in our live. Okay, going back to the Brasilia, which I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So, for those who do not know Brasilia, it sounds like Brazil, right? Like Brazil, Brasilia. So, Brasilia is a variation of Brazil, and Brasilia is the capital of the country. Brasilia is a pretty interesting city. It was built out of nowhere, just kind of like it was the case for Las Vegas in the US, right? Like it was a by design city. It's not something that started naturally. So, almost 100 years ago, not 100 years ago, about 70, 80 years ago, decided to develop a whole new city that would be the capital of the country. And the idea was to have a more central location for a capital of the country. Before Brasilia, Rio de Janeiro was actually capital, but Rio de Janeiro is way down the south, so it was kind of alienating for people like in the north, in the northeast, in the center west, and because of that, the idea was to find it almost like a geographical center of the country for the capital, and that was the whole point for Brasilia. So everything is by design in Brasilia, and it's pretty interesting. As you may expect, we have a relationship with different embassies, right? There is a distinction between consulate and embassy. Usually, there is a single embassy for a country in another country. So, in Brasilia, we're going to have embassies, and they are almost like in a row, one after another. We have the embassy, and very curious, like we have Russia. After Russia comes the United States, right? And then we have, like major embassies for Australia, for the UK, for France, and of course many other countries. But the main countries, like like say if I can say main countries, But I would say back in the day when like this sector was being developed, Brazil gave a priority to countries that had a higher weight from a geopolitical perspective, and they are all in a row. And that's why you see, Russia and United States, back to back. It's so interesting, okay? And all of them, they have a kind of official sign provided by the Brazilian government, and they all look the same. Of course, it changes like the colors to match the country, but the size of the sign, the lettering, the font, the style, they are all the same, and they are all in a row, one after the other. Okay, pretty interesting. All right. Benjamin Petrillo, do you have any update on your book for $25? Benjamin, I apologize. Okay, we are reviewing a bunch of stuff with this book. To stop our work to do a good job in terms of the update. There are still things to be fixed over there. That's why we are not selling currently, but you are in our list as soon as it's live. Rest assured, we're gonna let you know. Okay, I think I remember. I think you bought the book. There was like a few people who bought the book. The book was not available, and we did a refund on the same day. I hope it was your case, Benjamin, that you got your refund on the same day, not on the day after. And again, my apologies for the book not being available as we speak, but we're doing our best. Right now, for some reason, there is a peak in demand for our services, so we need to serve our clients, to deliver what they are paying us for. As soon as we have an opportunity, we're gonna take care of the book, and we gonna let you know. Okay, Benjamin. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for reminding us. It's good to know that people are expecting our book, because then we know we should put in the effort, even if it's by working on Saturdays and Sundays, to have our book back to the store. Thank you so much, Benjamin. Tucansville, hey there, what do you think of fundos imobiliários? Funda de Tirilo could be good investment for gringos. Yeah, so usually, like these funds, could be they could be a good idea for investments. Okay, in Brazil, here we have this understanding that fundos imobiliários, for those who do not know, they are investment funds focused on real estate, right? So many, for instance, they buy properties in Brazil to rent these properties out, maybe doing short term or long term. Some people, they want to enjoy their properties when they are in Brazil. When they are not in Brazil, they are going to rent. Other people, they just want to invest money, right? So the fundos imobiliários, or real estate funds, they are a pretty decent option. Okay, and the knowledge, like here in Brazil, is that these funds, they actually perform better than individual properties. Okay, I myself, I don't like investment in funds, like particularly these funds, a lot, because I think that sometimes people are too attached to return rates. And return rates, I think it is something secondary, in my opinion. Okay, the most important factor about investing is to keep money outside of your reach. Okay, so when you buy real estate, you kind of immobilize, right? Imóvel. That's how we say real estate in Brazil. Imóvel, right? A property, we call it imóvel. It means immovable, like you can move this thing, like it's kind of frozen. Okay, and you are protecting your money from yourself. If you have like the investment funds in real estate, and something happens to a friend, something happens to your family, it's super easy. It's super easy for you to go there and sell this thing, and get rid of it. Now, if you buy a real estate property, particularly in Brazil, it's usually a pain in the neck to sell this property out. So you are kind of protecting your assets from yourself, okay? That's my reasoning. That's the way I see it. So I particularly don't invest in real estate funds. I invest whenever I have an opportunity. I'm going to invest in real estate itself, because then, of course, like if there is a family member in need, you're going to end up finding a way to help. But the problem with investment funds is that, in my opinion, it is too easy for you to withdraw the money and find another destination for it. Real estate, the fact that it's difficult for you to, sell this thing, right? Particularly if you want to sell it for the right amount, it takes a long time. So by the time you are ready to sell this property, hopefully you found a plan B for doing whatever you need to do, and the real estate is going to remain in your portfolio, potentially generating income forever, right? So in my opinion, I don't touch investment funds. I am a guy who believes in like real estate properties, right? I invest in real estate properties. That's my take. But the understanding from like the Brazilian investment firms is that the real estate funds in Brazil, they are better than investing in individual properties. Okay, that's the answer, Tukan. Okay, so we've been online for over an hour now. I would like to thank you for participating in our live stream. If you didn't have an opportunity, to have a topic of your interest to discuss today, we're gonna be together again on Sunday. Okay, I'm gonna make sure as soon as this live stream is over, you're gonna see that there's gonna be a like YouTube a notice for the live stream on Sunday. If you go over there and you click on it, you're gonna be alerted as soon as the live stream starts. Make note of any topics of your interest, and I hope to see you again on Sunday. Have a great rest of your day.